On behalf of Vestex, it's my pleasure to welcome you today webinar on the results of the 2025 fashion industry benchmarking study. For us at Vestex, this study is particularly important because it helps us understand what's on the mind of our international clients, the challenges they face today, and how they see the future. At the same time, it's an invitation to reflect on the advantages and challenges our industry faces, especially in this new trade landscape, and how we can better position ourselves in global supply chains. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you that you can write your questions in the chat throughout the presentation. After Dr. Sheng Lu's presentation, we will open the space for Q&A. And well, something important is that this study is produced by the United States Fashion Industry Association, USFIA, in collaboration with Dr. Sheng Lu. And it has become one of the most relevant sources for understanding sourcing and trade trends in the global fashion industry. Today, we will have the opportunity to learn firsthand the findings of its 11th edition with updated insights on the business environment, sourcing practices, and the use of trade agreements such as CAFTA-DR. So to begin with, it's a honor for me to introduce our first speaker, Julia Hughes, President of the United States Fashion Industry Association, USFIA. Julia leads an association that represents the brands, the retailers, importers, wholesalers in the United States with operations all around the world. She plays a key role in representing the industry before the US government and international stakeholders, highlighting how fashion companies create high-quality jobs in the United States and drive economic opportunities globally. So today she will share with us the background of the study and her outlook on the current market situation. So Julia, it's such a pleasure to have you here, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Andrea, and thanks to everyone. It's a real pleasure to join you today and say a few words as we kick off this in-depth look at some of the results from the survey. I'm only sorry I'm not there with you in person in Guatemala, but I'm happy that we can do this virtually. Looking at, so we have this slide that just gives a little bit of background about the benchmarking survey this year for the types of companies, mainly large companies that participated in the survey. And of course, respondents that are retailers or brands, importers, or could be sourcing agents as well. I will say that this year was particularly hard for many of the respondents to answer the survey. I heard from a lot of them personally, because while the results are anonymous, I don't know who said what. To tell you their perspective. Everyone was saying, normally in their company, they would be bringing together information from sourcing executives, logistics, trends, C-suite, compliance, and, provide that kind of big overview into what the company sees for the year ahead and synthesizing that internally. But this year was a little bit different, as you all know, where there was so much happening. The survey, you'll note, was from April to June. So, sadly, we opened the survey right after what President Trump called Liberation Day, and what I don't know what negative word I could use to describe that day, but the beginning of the announcement for the tariffs. So, what we see here is, a lot of thoughtful answers from companies, unlike most years where I think it's pretty easy for them to respond. This year took a lot more thought, particularly as business environment, and especially what their sourcing practices and decisions would be for the year ahead. I was just at Magic, as was Dr. Lu, and we continued to hear, similarly responses from companies who still are concerned about the uncertainty and disruption and not sure how to plan. So I just kind of wanted to mention that as we jump in, but we do have a lot of really interesting results. And I think, as I often say, the results show there is a real opportunity, particularly for Guatemala sourcing. And I think brands and retailers are open to that. We just need to figure out how to bring everyone together. So let me stop there and let's turn it over to Dr. Lu to dive into the results of the survey. And again, so happy to join you today. And I'll take questions at the end if you have some policy questions, but we're going to focus on the survey now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia. Well, you already introduced Dr. Sheng Lu. So actually, just for everyone who doesn't know him, he is a professor and director of the graduate studies in the Department of Fashion Apparel Studies at the University of Delaware. Dr. Lu has an international recognized academic and professional trajectory. We all love him in this industry. He has worked as a consultant for the World Trade Organization and the United Nations. He has published more than 80 academic and industry papers. His research on international trade, trade policy as global apparel value chain has been cited by the US Congress, the US International Trade Commission, the World Bank, and the ILO. His work has also been featured on leading global media, including the Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, BBC World, New York Times, Nikkei Asian Review, and Forbes. So today, Dr. Lu will walk us through the key findings of the 2025 benchmarking study, including the sourcing trends, their risk, trade policy, and opportunities for our region. So Dr. Sheng, the floor is all yours.
Sure. Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Andrea, and also thank you, Julie, for giving us a very comprehensive introduction about the study's background. So I'm not going to read the report this morning because that could be boring, but instead I'm going to highlight some of the most interesting and intriguing findings of this year's study. And hopefully after the presentation, you will have more interest in reading the full report, which is available at the USFIA website. So as Julie mentioned, and maybe you agree with me too, so for this year, truly the top concern for US fashion brands and retailers is tariff. So as an economist, here I just checked the real US trade data and produced this graph, which can give you an impression about the current applied US tariff rate for apparel imports. I take away two information from this graph. One is you can really see, the tariff rates, so far this year has been much higher than the beginning of the year. And the second is, it's just not, the higher tariff rate, is not just limited to a few number of suppliers, but rather, it applies to, all sources of imports, including for CAFTA-DR members. Unfortunately, I have to say this, because of the current policy, somehow it changed people's perception about the benefits of having a free trade agreement with the US, okay? And it's not just about the tariff rate itself that is a concern, but also, as Julie mentioned, a big, worry is uncertainty. Even we have the tariff rates out there, and also you can check a lot of tariff rates mentioned in the executive order published published by the White House. But still, there are a lot of question marks out there. For example, will the announced tariff rate change, and when they will change? Okay, we have to follow social media, not just the White House, but also social media very closely. And also, how about the tariff rate facing imports from China and also from India? Still, it's kind of like a pending questions out there. And a big topic these days is how to interpret some tariff rate, because if some imports are determined as transshipment, okay, and they may face even higher tariff rate. But what's the definition of transshipment? It looks like, it's not a traditional way of interpreting this concept. And also, we know just last week, IEEPA tariff was judged as illegal. So what's to expect next? So still, I feel, there are a lot of uncertainties out there. And truly, the higher tariff rate and uncertainty, it's not good news for the business. Okay, so not surprising, even though it's very concerning, but not too surprising. Almost all respondents, they regard the current U.S. trade policy, including tariff policy, their top concern. And actually, if you're looking at the second to the fourth top business concern facing U.S. companies, they still kind of really reviewed the ripple effect, the wide and also very significant ripple effects of tariff, from adding uncertainty to the U.S. economy, increasing sourcing cost, to raising concern about trade retaliation. And before the webinar, and I just chatting with some of our guests, just about some recent industry event I attended. And a lot of US-based textile and apparel manufacturers, not retailers, but manufacturers, they also express grave concern about trade retaliation they faced from some US trading partners. Yeah, so just a few detailed impact about tariff. One is definitely the trade volume. Just to give you a context, last year when I did this study, and I was concerned about the declining U.S. apparel import volume. Okay, so kind of U.S. companies, they source fewer products, but somehow this year the situation became even worse. So you can see from this graph, even more companies, they say they will expect a decline of their sourcing value or volume, and more companies expect, and fewer companies expect an increase. Okay, so kind of the trend is like the pie is shrinking. The pie is shrinking. And the survey data actually is highly consistent with what I see from the macro data. So on this graph, you can see the macro trade statistics. As economists, I love to check the macro trade data. One is the value of U.S. apparel retail sales, so the end demand for clothing. Okay, and if you remove the seasonality, remove inflation, you can see the U.S. apparel sales this year actually has no growth from 3 to 4 years ago. Or we can put it this way, kind of the demand for clothing is stagnant. Exactly what our respondents told us. Okay, and for trade volume, it's even worse. Okay, and you can if you're looking at the value of imports or even the volume of imports this year versus 3 years ago, we're down almost 1/3. And even this year's value of imports was lower than the pre-COVID level. Okay, so kind of reflect my points earlier, that is the pie is shrinking. Okay, and when the pie is shrinking, that is U.S. companies import fewer products, this is not good news, even for nearshoring, for sourcing from the Western Hemisphere. So on this graph, you can see two lines. One is the blue line, the value of U.S. apparel imports from USMCA and also from CAFTA-DR members. So far this year, actually, it went down. It's not go up, it's went down. Okay, and correspondingly, because of the co-production chain in the Western Hemisphere, actually, this year is not good for U.S. textile export either. So U.S. textile exports to USMCA members like Mexico and to CAFTA-DR members also suffer significant loss. Okay, and likewise, I checked the production data. Okay, concerning but not too surprising. Okay, I do not see the current trade policy, the current tariff policy has benefit U.S. domestic textile and apparel production. Even worse, or on the contrary, I see even more significant decline of U.S. textile and apparel production so far this year. Okay, but when the domestic demand is kind of shrinking, when your export declined, of course, the production went down. Okay, and unfortunately, this kind of situation may last for a while. So according to some leading consulting companies, their latest forecast, the annual U.S. apparel retail sale, you can see this year probably will be just flat. And next year will be very similar. So we may expect this kind of low growth, market growth will continue in the next few years. And, based on these results, I really want to share some comments I collected, from a recent study with my students. So they're all Gen Z, which is a very important, consumer group for brands and retailers these days. And you can really see their comments about their shifting shopping behavior. Okay, and given the high inflation, given their more awareness of the environmental impact of making and consuming garments, truly, I feel like they're shopping less, or they purchase fewer clothing, especially brand new clothing. So which really kind of explained the macro trade data or the survey data I shared earlier. Okay. Yeah, and then the next impact, of course, is the higher sourcing cost facing U.S. companies because of the tariff increase. You can see 100% of respondents expect their sourcing cost to go up this year, especially driven by a higher tariff rate. And also they expect not just modest increase, but substantial cost increase. Okay. And this is the macro data, okay, really echo the results from our survey. One is if you're looking at the price index of U.S. apparel imports, okay, it started to increase significantly since this May. Okay, and I think the newer data will come out in the next few weeks, and my forecast will be continue this trend. Okay. And what's happening at the retail market actually is quite interesting. So this is the price index of U.S. apparel retail, market, and you can see there, the price increase hasn't started yet. Okay, so this is definitely something interesting to interpret. What does that mean? What does that exactly mean? So my interpretation is one is the price increase hasn't started yet. But based on what I've heard from brands, retailers, and from industry stakeholders, almost all of them predict the price increase will start very soon. Okay, and remember, I just mentioned U.S. consumers, they're already very concerned about the current, economic situation. They have started to slow down their spending, and when the price go up further, and this is not good news. Okay, and a second. Okay, and based on companies, their kind of interpretation of the current situation and also the market trend, I feel like brands and retailers either they're not willing to or they do not dare to run the risk of raising the price across the board. Okay, so despite the much higher sourcing cost, like you see from the previous graph, the price of imports start to increase significantly. But brands and retailers, in the worry about losing their customer, they do not dare to increase, to fully pass the additional tariff cost to consumers. And this also means brands and retailers, they will suffer financial losses, or they will care even more about how to, find a way to mitigate the cost increase. Okay. So this comes to the next slide. That is, how brands and retailers they're thinking about to mitigate the tariff impact. Okay, so according to our respondents, there's no panacea, so they try many different ways. And in general, I find that larger companies, they probably will have more human talents and financial resources to try many technical ways. Measures like, say, to use tariff engineering, to renegotiate the, contract with their suppliers, to change the terms of trade from FOB to DDP, use first sale or even free trade zone. But in general, okay, one of the most popular method is sourcing diversification. Okay, but at the same time, even in the context of sourcing diversification, you can see there is only limited interest of expanding sourcing, locally from the USA, and I'll explain why that's the case. So perfect timing to go deep into sourcing strategy in 2025. Okay. Now, one is start with this graph, and I personally call it the most boring graph. I keep updating each month. Why? Because there seems to be little change or no change at all. So in general, this graph shows the sources of U.S. apparel imports. The red part is imports from Asia, which typically account for like a 72 to 74% of U.S. apparel imports. And the blue part is imports from the Western Hemisphere, from CAFTA-DR members, USMCA members, okay? And the yellow part is the rest of the world, okay? So truly, even when you look at the data this year, there seems to be very little change. However, remember, what I mentioned earlier, this year, U.S. fashion brands, fashion companies, they intend to diversify their sourcing base. So how to see sourcing diversification from this trade data? So that's the question in my mind, okay? So if you cannot see too obviously about sourcing diversification here, the next slide probably will give us a little more information, okay? So truly, at the country level, okay, I see significant change or some notable changes, especially within Asia. So even though Asia as a whole, their market share looks very stable, but within Asia, there are a lot of changes. So we see China's market share fell significantly so far this year because of the extremely high tariff rates for facing their products from April to May, okay, at least, and then imports from many additional Asian countries or these emerging suppliers in Asia actually went up significantly. Okay, I sometimes put it this way: despite of a tariff, 2025 may not be too bad year for Asian countries except for China. If you're looking at market share of Vietnam, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Cambodia, their apparel export to the U.S. actually enjoying very stable and solid growth this year, which definitely reflect companies their shifting sourcing strategy. Okay, and the macro data, once again, highly consistent with what we found in our survey. For example, this year, our respondents report sourcing their products from 46 countries, okay, and which is more than 20. More than 44 back in 2020. In 2023. Even though for the top 10 most utilized sourcing base, their list, still is these 10 countries. But what's interesting to me is the utilization rate for countries ranked from the 3rd to the 5th, okay, increased significantly. Okay, so putting this way, in the past, companies mostly either just source from China or just source from Vietnam, but this year they also more frequently source from Cambodia, source from Indonesia, or even India. So you can see these companies ranked the 3rd to the 6th. Okay, their utilization rate increased significantly. Okay, and of course, we also noticed 2 non-Asian countries made to the top 10 list, including Guatemala, okay, which also, showcase companies' consistent interest in sourcing from the Western Hemisphere, okay? And the next slide also reflects sourcing diversification, okay? This reflects, how many companies they source from more than 10 countries, source from more than 6 countries. And if you compare the results this year versus in 2022, you can see a record high percentage of companies they report sourcing from 6 countries or 10 countries. Once again, this is the result of sourcing diversification. Okay, and regarding the next 2 years, okay, even though companies their detailed sourcing strategy varies. But still, the most popular trend is to source from more countries and even work with more vendors. That is, sourcing diversification. And of course, maybe you're thinking, why is the case? What motivates companies to continue to diversify their sourcing base? And we ask the same question, okay? And this is the result. So you can see compared to the answers in the previous years, this year, definitely tariff. Tariff is a very important, driving force. A lot of companies, they expect to find a way to lower not just the cost of sourcing, but also to mitigate the risk when they choose to diversify their sourcing base. Okay, because they see kind of no country is safe. There's no safe harbor out there. So the best way is to mitigate the impact is to build a diverse sourcing base. But what's interesting to me is even for companies which choose to work with fewer vendors or even just to maintain the status quo, they still have or embrace the word diversification in mind, or they're ready to diversify their sourcing base, but just probably just to achieve that in different ways. For example, some companies mentioned they would love to work with so-called super vendors. These vendors, these suppliers that have multiple country presence or can make products in different regions of the world. Okay, and some also say they're just wait and see, and if they see the timing comes, they will consider to diversify and shift their current sourcing base. So once again, I truly see sourcing diversification reflected in respondents' comment. Okay. And another related question is where to increase sourcing. What are some of the most popular emerging sourcing destinations? Okay, and related from where companies want to further reduce sourcing. So here on this graph, you can see one country is somehow singled out. Even though the font is too small, but you can guess which country this red bar represents. That is China. So despite all these news out there, the ongoing trade negotiation between US and China, but still for US brands and retailers, most of them still see the risk of sourcing from China, and they still plan to reduce their sourcing volume and the volume, sourcing value and the volume from the country. All we call it reduced China exposure. Okay. At the same time, you can see the most popular emerging sourcing destinations or these alternative to sourcing from China are still Asia-based. Actually, these are the exact countries I mentioned earlier. These ranked from the 3rd to the 6th, with increasing utilization rate. Okay. Additionally, you can see still there are consistent interest of expanding sourcing from the Western Hemisphere, including from CAFTA-DR members. But one is this intention to increase sourcing from the Western Hemisphere is not a replacement, is not a substitution of sourcing from Asia. Just they want to expand sourcing from Western Hemisphere as part of companies' overall sourcing diversification strategy. And also overall, the interest of expanding sourcing from the Western Hemisphere somehow is still kind of, lower than increased sourcing from Asia. So why is that? Why still, despite of the current situation, US fashion brands and retailers still regard increasing sourcing from Asia, is like their preference or their priority, okay? So I try to put myself in the shoes of US brands and retailers, and I come up with these questions I think maybe very important to them, to their sourcing strategy. One is, they are thinking about the additional risk of facing, Trump's tariff, because nobody knows what will happen next, right? Tariff is like a box of chocolates. US trading partners somehow don't know. We'll never know what tariff rate they're going to face. But in this case, there's no safe harbor. So countries are equally kind of risky to face additional Trump's tariff. Then it comes to the next question. So which sourcing destination can offer me the most competitive price or can help me mitigate the hiking tariff increase? That's something I think matters a lot to US companies. And also because of the uncertainty. So it's very likely, brands and retailers may have to adjust their existing sourcing schedule or maybe their shipping schedule. So who is ready? Who is ready to make additional products for me or even ship, next season's items to me early. Okay, so of course, these countries that has flexible manufacturing capability, win the sourcing order. Okay, and then likewise, as I mentioned earlier, companies are looking for China's alternative. Okay, remember these days, U.S. companies source from China not for these basic items, not even for cheap products, but for many different kinds of products. That's China's unique advantages. You can almost source all kinds of products from China. And also, companies would like to leverage China's flexibility and agility. So can you do that as well? Can you offer many different kinds of products to the market? I think that's a very important question. Okay. And of course, flexibility and agility. And I mentioned these two words repeatedly. Okay. And with that, I think this graph make a lot of sense. So in the report, I will encourage you to find a graph which look like a traffic light, like a blue light, red light, and green light. So that graph, reveals how U.S. fashion companies see the competitiveness of each major sourcing destination, from Asia to Western Hemisphere to Europe, etc. So here I just summarize the rating for countries based in Asia versus those in the Western Hemisphere, including Mexico and CAFTA-DR members. Okay, so we use 5-point scale. So rating 1 means the least competitive, and rate 5 means the best performance. So you can see overall Asian countries outperform suppliers in the Western Hemisphere in terms of these business-related indicators like sourcing cost, flexibility, agility, minimum order quantity, and the vertical manufacturing capability. So kind of give answer to the questions I asked earlier. Okay, or put it this way, Asian countries somehow did a better job in providing the exact products, the exact service, and the exact flexibility U.S. fashion brands and retailers are looking for. Okay. And additionally, this is a separate study. I have the chance to check some real product data, okay, or the actual clothing products available or newly launched to the U.S. market in most recent month. Okay, I think this data is run from April to. Sorry, I just clicked the wrong button. Yeah. So this graph reflects the actual products available in the U.S. retail market. So I checked those products run from April to August this year versus last year. So two things you can read from this graph. One is truly U.S. companies import far fewer products from China. That's number one. But number two, so in terms of the variety kinds of products, still China offers far more different kinds of products to the market than any suppliers in the world. Okay, or you still need to use or leverage sourcing diversification to match what China offered to the market. And as Julie mentioned, I just came back from Magic as well. And what caught my attention is this advertisement featured by some Chinese vendors. So they not only these days feature their products, but also they feature their many value-added sourcing services to stay competitive. For example, drop shipping. So they will allow U.S. brands and retailers, especially these relatively small ones, to only take care of marketing and sales. So they say they can take care of shipping, inventory management, packaging, or definitely dealing with customs. So you can really see, these kind of value-added services can increase the attractiveness, of sourcing from, these suppliers. And of course, you can see, the minimum order quantity is only about 300 pieces, or even very small orders, 6 pieces, single digit. And they also offer warehousing in the U.S., which can really speed up the shipping. So once again, these value-added services, definitely will make sourcing from China still relevant. Okay, even in the current situation. And also China not just offer, these cheap products in the market. And you can see these days, US companies source a lot of premium and even luxury products from China. And the only country that is, closer to China's, export structure is India. Unfortunately, these days, India also face, substantial higher tariff rates than the rest of the world. And if you're looking at, imports from Guatemala, at this point, they still primarily focus on the mass and the value market, okay? And this is not the first time I bring up this, viewpoints or, shared relevant data. That is the, export structure, product structure. So here you can see, U.S. apparel imports from, from CAFTA-DR members primarily focus on tops and actually primarily focus on T-shirts. My point, once again, my point is not, T-shirts are not important. Tops are not important. My point here is because brands and retailers, they're looking for China's alternative. They're looking for Asia's competitive. So these alternative ideally should offer similar kinds of products China offers to the market, okay? And then if you check this data, okay, the kinds of products China, offer to the U.S. market, T-shirt, it's a very small proportion, okay? Or even tops, it's only part of many products, far more products China offers to the market. So this, once again, explain why Asian countries overall are regarded as the preferred sourcing destination or receive many additional sourcing orders from U.S. brands and retailers when they do, reducing China exposure, okay? And this is additional data I checked. That is the utilization rate of CAFTA-DR. The good news is, I'm glad to see more companies, they now use CAFTA-DR when they source from the region. And you may recall, in the past, we, have concern that, companies, would rather just, forego the benefits of sourcing, forego the benefits under CAFTA-DR, when they source from the region. But this year we see notable improvement of utilizing this agreement. However, bad news is despite the higher utilization of the agreement, CAFTA-DR countries still lose market share. Okay, so this leaves us with an impression, okay, yarn forward rules of origin or just maintain the status quo is not the total solution to substantially, expand sourcing from the region. So I think the problem for this region is not U.S. companies are not interested in sourcing from the region, is how to expand, how to encourage them to expand sourcing from a region, not simply, they're not sourcing from here, but how to expand. I see stagnation here, okay? And this is the results from our survey, okay? Still, I think, textile raw materials, how to diversify the source of textile raw materials and expand the local manufacturing capability is very important, okay? And actually, I'm not totally expected this, but even for cotton production, cotton-related fabrics, cotton-related yarns, U.S. fashion companies want to see more production capability. So of course, if the region, if Guatemala, can continue to attract more investment to strengthen local textile manufacturing capability, it should help expanding apparel sourcing from the region. Okay, but don't be discouraged by all the information shared here so far. And I do want to share one good news, and also I personally really feel very passionate about, that is sustainable products. Okay, if you're looking at major U.S. brands and retailers, their website, many commit to use more so-called preferred sustainable fiber in the next few years. And many say they will 100% use this fiber for their self-owned brand. That's a very important trend. And at the same time, according to our survey respondents, for these kind of sustainable apparel products, using, say, organic, recycled, or regenerated fiber, more likely, they will source the textile raw materials and also the finished products from the US and also from the Western Hemisphere. Okay, so put it this way, carrying such products not only can bring not only can bring environmental benefits to U.S. brands and retailers, but also somehow can benefit or help these brands and retailers to achieve sourcing diversification. So that's my observation. And also, these products, they're no longer just niche products anymore. And actually, according to our respondents, these products already account for a substantial portion of their total imported products. And this percentage and this volume will continue to increase in the next few years, okay? And this is my data. I checked what's available currently in the market. And one is consistent with our survey data. You can see, far more sustainable products now available in the U.S. market. These use preferred fiber. And at the same time, you can see, in particular, recycled materials, they account for a lion's share of such products in the market so far. But also, products using or containing regenerative fiber, they also enjoy very fast growth. Although overall they still account for a relatively small portion of the total product offers, but this is a growth opportunity here. And again, and I like to share the comments from my students. One is to show you that they're very committed to sustainability, despite of the current situation. Actually, many say, if they have to pay higher to get products, they will definitely not buy, pay the same price, much higher price for fast fashion. Instead, they're going to purchase products that can demonstrate higher quality and more sustainability. Okay, so definitely, I think it's a great, despite of these financial pressure, but it's not the time, our industry should hold back its investment, its commitment to sustainability. And as I mentioned earlier, instead, I see this as a great growth opportunity, both for U.S. brands and retailers, and also for suppliers, in the Western Hemisphere, to find a new way and find a new strategy and angle to expand sourcing. Expand exporting to the U.S. market. Yeah. So that concludes my presentation. So I think the report itself includes many additional relevant and informative topics, like companies, their detailed sourcing strategy, portfolio, how to look at, forced labor, UFLPA. So feel free to read the report and let us know if you have any questions. So thank you again, and we're happy to take any questions. Go back to you, Andrea.
Thank you so much, Sheng. Actually, it's very impressive how you summarize all the study, because it has a lot of inside information. And thank you for not only sharing the results of the study, but also the macroeconomic figures that help us understand where the industry stands at this moment. At this point, we will open the floor for questions from the audience, and we will begin with those already written in the chat. So we have, let me start with the first one, that is that, how do you think the outlook for CAFTA will be in the coming years?
Yeah, so my understanding is this question asks about the outlook of U.S. apparel sourcing from CAFTA-DR. Two comments. One is, I think companies are interested in sourcing from the region. The issue is how to expand more sourcing from a region, okay? My worry here is, is the pie itself is shrinking because of the current U.S. economy and also the tariff situation. Okay, remember, CAFTA-DR used to be, a place companies can save, import duties. But now even sourcing from CAFTA-DR has to pay 10%, tariff duty, which is not good news. And at the same time, if the overall pie continues to shrink, if U.S. consumers continue to buy fewer new clothing, and the trade volume will continue to fall, and this is not good news for CAFTA-DR sourcing. Yeah.
Great. And well, this one is for you and also for Julia. As you mentioned, you have both participated in big international events like conferences and exhibitions like Magic. From that experience, what suggestion would you give to Vestex and the Guatemalan companies to see this situation as an opportunity?
Well, maybe Julie can start.
Sure. Thanks a lot for the question. And I do just want to add on to what Sheng said in response to the last question, which is I do think there's an opportunity for CAFTA suppliers and especially for Guatemala. I mean, the fact is we are not done yet with the tariff negotiations or have an understanding of where the tariffs will end up. So we're not going to talk about the lawsuit challenge, which obviously is very important. But also, could there be decreases in the tariff on yarn forward qualifying products to the US market? Obviously, that is that's a provision for Mexico and Canada. And I think there has been a lot of suggestions from brands and retailers to the Trump administration that they should broaden that provision to other free trade agreements. Now, I'll be honest, they're not really listening to the business community on the tariff issue. The tariffs and tariff decisions are really decisions that are made by the president, who loves tariffs and thinks that the tariffs are a good thing for the US economy. So I'm not saying that it's necessarily going to happen, but I do think that it's part of the discussion and we're hopeful. And that would, of course, be a great benefit for CAFTA suppliers. Okay, putting aside the trade negotiations, I continue to think that, one of the key factors, and I really felt this talking to folks on the show floor in Las Vegas, is brands and retailers say they're interested in more Western Hemisphere sourcing. I suspect that all of you in the audience say, where are the customers, right? I'm looking for more business. So the question is, how do we get everyone together talking about the same, right, opportunities? And what are the requirements? Because we know it takes a while for a brand to bring on a new supplier. Just because it isn't just anymore, someone would come in and they had a tech pack and they would say, hey, can you make this? It's much more complicated these days, right? It's, can you make this? What's the logistics, shipping time? Do you have product development? There are a lot of the smaller companies who are looking for that from their producer, which is really important. And then, of course, the compliance part, which I think we can agree that the suppliers, all of you in Guatemala, are compliant, but you still need to go through a process to prove that you're compliant. And that takes time. So there's this lag. And as Sheng said, right now, for many brands, they're not necessarily bringing on a new supplier quickly until they see, one, where the tariffs end up, and then take a look at what consumer demand is going to be. We're hopeful it's not as bad as some of the predictions have been, but so let me stop there. But I think part of it is, how do we bring everyone together as an association person? I'm often talking about that. I do think that that's so important that we have that dialogue.
Yeah, and I totally agree with Julie. And even I'm not speaking from the brand's perspective, just speaking as a scholar. I'd love to have more access to data relevant to the textile and apparel industry in Guatemala. So feel free to share more information about what you're making, right? And thinking this way, the more information can share out there, we can access to, and more we can really analyze the data and really present the true picture to brands and retailers, helping them understand the manufacturing capability and potential in Guatemala. So I think this kind of engagement can be even more important in the current timing.
Great. And thank you very much for those insights that are very valuable for us, specifically hearing from you and another perspective. So now we have another question, and it is that with the recent change in global tariffs on textiles and apparel, where do you see the key leverage point for the Western Hemisphere to strengthen competitiveness when nearshoring to the US market? Is the main gap a lack of investment in innovation, or do you see other critical factors?
Maybe I can start first, and Julie, feel free to join later. Yeah, so one is I still see there's stable interest of sourcing from Western Hemisphere. Okay, it's not like, once again, it's not like companies stop sourcing from the region. The issue is how to encourage more sourcing. But at the same time, we see most of the products currently concentrate on these basic items, relatively basic items. So how to diversify the product offer can be key for the region to attract more order. Just like our universities, right? We always want to offer more timely and the market attractive new majors. Therefore, we can increase enrollment. It's the same thing here. And also, definitely, I think, companies currently, they worry a lot about additional sourcing cost. Okay, so how you can also convince brands and retailers. Actually, there's a lot of way, even though this region is not known for being cheap, but considering all these factors, still being a member of CAFTA-DR, don't have the most favored nation tariff rate, or through collaboration with US suppliers to save sourcing cost in areas beyond the tariff itself. And I think it's a great opportunity, to convince brands and retailers to source from the region. And additionally, and once again, I'm so passionate about sustainability. I think being able to offer more such products. The thing is, many of your facility is brand new, right? And this is different from many Asian suppliers. They has been there for decades, but this also means they have additional cost to bring in new machines, bring new technology to make these sustainable products. But for for a lot of factories in Guatemala, you can directly attract new investment in these emerging product areas, and this can be a unique opportunity to shape your competitiveness in the long run. So, and again, I will just stop here. Julie.
Sure, and just to build on what Sheng just said, I think a key opportunity is in the circularity area for sustainability. And I understand there was recently a report that had been done about opportunities in Guatemala, because it turns out from the data that a lot of the US used textile waste is going to Guatemala for sorting and for recycling of those products. Now, it's a complicated process. I'm not sure what happens to it after it's sorted and is actually recycled. Where does it go? But there could be an opportunity there for the circularity that makes sense in terms of the relationships that already exist. So I do think that that's important. And the other point I just want to mention, and this has always been a contradiction for brands and retailers, right? Because they're looking for efficiency and lower costs, which means, big runs of key products. But more and more companies are looking for, so what's special? What can separate us out? And that means looking at the MOQs is really important, and the opportunity to offer more sourcing for smaller quantities. Even for some of the larger companies that you would consider a larger company, is still something that they're looking for, given slower consumer demand. How do you bump up that demand, and how do you have something special that's in your store?
Great. Thank you both. And another question. Here they said that the region needs more FDI from Asian firms to bring product diversification. So what will be your recommendation to trigger these large manufacturers firms' interest to explore the region as an expanding or relocalization of investment destination?
And to me, we need policy certainty. Indeed. Think about this. Textile mill is different from maybe apparel production. You need a very foreseeable business environment to attract long-term investment. Okay, and I think the advantages for a lot of Asian countries these days is their manufacturing capacity is ready. Therefore, they can take additional orders from brands and retailers. But for Western Hemisphere, you will need additional investment. But unfortunately, given the current business environment, investors are hesitant, or they'll wait and see. Even though in the long run it's still very promising, but just in the short run, I see a lot of companies, they'll wait and see to see what's going to happen next. Yeah, so policy environment definitely matters.
I think also, so we should ask Andres to share with us after this, what he sees and what the recommendations are. I mean, the U.S., had been supporting those opportunities in the region to attract new investment. And of course, the Trump administration has cut all of the funding for those USAID projects that were really looking at how to integrate our economies more. So yes, I agree with Sheng, like, unfortunately, like the timing is off right at this moment, right? September 2025. We still have a lot of uncertainty, but we're going to get through this where, all right, the US, how can I put the president may never be predictable, but I think we're going to see more predictability in the tariff regime that can give more confidence to say, I'm ready to spend the money it takes to make that investment, because in the long term, we know it will be a successful investment. And it kind of goes to the question that someone else had put in the chat about, sales to Europe. I mean, I think the whole world is looking at the supply chain and sourcing patterns to say the US, all right, what can we do where we're not just in the US, right? How can we develop those other relationships? And I think that's going to continue even if the US tariffs craziness slows down.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think also, well, there is something about sustainability, but probably I will like to ask you this. You mentioned capacity gaps in the textile and accessories. So I would like to know what specific local or international investments or partnerships will be most effective for Guatemala to close those gaps and have these first quick wins that we can take from people that wants to near shore.
No, this is just my personal view. Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear
Okay,
you.
yeah. To be honest, somehow I find a little bit hard to interpret the slides which showing companies, suggested investment areas. They cover all major types of fabrics, all major types of yarns, which leave me an impression like one is maybe, there should be more, and I should not say coordination because there's antitrust law there. But really, companies see a lot of gaps, or maybe they're interested in sourcing all kinds of products from Guatemala. Okay, so maybe it's not necessarily have to narrow your search to any specific products, but just, there's so many opportunities out there. But second, I think still I see a, very important kind of, or very, beneficial results of having more engagement between brands, retailers, and the suppliers in Guatemala, because understanding mutual interest and also figure out a strategy, private sector strategy, and also get support from, policymakers, can be win-win.
I mean, and if I can just add, I mean, and because I don't feel I can answer that question very well, but I'd love to know what were some of the key takeaways. This is a conversation for another time, I'm sure, but what were some of the key takeaways from the apparel sourcing show in August, right? Just a few weeks ago. What were those conversations on the show floor, or when folks were doing a tour of the factory? Like what is that dialogue? Because I think there is no universal answer. I mean, it's really company by company. And then that's why we do the benchmarking survey to try to aggregate. So do we see a trend there? But as Sheng said, companies, sourcing execs are responding that they need everything. Well, you can't do everything. So what would be the top priorities? And I would suspect you probably heard some of that during your conversations last month.
Yeah, that's true. I think that specifically if some people wants to focus more into sports, dresses or something like that, it will be very specific needs about what is the gap that we have to fulfill there. So, it's very important to keep on these conversations, and probably we will have it and make another webinar about it to see where we can find those opportunities. And well, there is another one about sustainability perspective and new Gen Z trend to buy. And here it says, do you see emerging opportunities in garment to textile recycling and circular business models within the apparel industry? Are there any tariff exceptions or trade incentives currently in place for these type of products?
Yeah, maybe Julie can answer the tariff question. What I've heard from some industry events is currently kind of like a secondhand clothing, they face very high tariff rates. And also the impact of secondhand clothing is kind of controversial. But no, for the first part, definitely I see great opportunity. And also don't forget, we have a lot of AI tools these days. It can play a very unique role in solving a lot of bottleneck problem facing textile recycling, and also to make the supply chain more kind of business friendly. And also there's more than just one specific supply chain for even when we're talking about recycled materials, because there can be so many different kinds of recycled materials, so many different ways to recycle them. And it's a great opportunity to bring business innovation, to the supply chain. But I can tell our Gen Z students, they love to see more such products be available in the market. And definitely circularity, from our academia's perspective, is a long-term trend, regardless of the tariff situation, regardless of these politics. But our industry need to consider the long-term sustainability impact and bring circularity into the business model.
Thanks. I'll just add, I'm really looking forward to, and if anyone in the audience is going to be in New York during New York City Climate Week, there are a number of events there that are going to focus on circularity. And in particular, there's going to be the release of a report. I think it's called Rags to Revenue. That is a collaboration with Accenture and the group Accelerating Circularity to look at circularity options. That I think is really important, that's part of the dialogue. Now for, trade incentives for these products, unfortunately, that's not a popular thing in our current political environment. I would say if the election had gone the other way, yes, there were definitely proposals on the table for specific tariff incentives that the administration was considering. But for right now, I don't think we're going to see anything in the short term, although there still is discussion among industry groups on how we can move toward an improved tariff regime for sustainable, recycled, circular products. But again, not to be negative, but probably not in the short run.
Great. I think that report will be great for our members to see and read, specifically of what is going on with the new Gen Z and what they are looking for the future, and to be ahead of that trend that it's going to come, maybe a little bit earlier than what we think. So just to finish with another questions for both of you, and just to know the perspectives that you have. What role do you see Guatemala and CAFTA-DR playing in the future of diversification sourcing strategies for the US brands?
Julie, would you like to start?
Well, okay, I know I was going to let you start, Sheng, but I'm happy to start. I mean, I continue to be very positive that I think that there is a valuable role and a successful role for the Guatemala industry as companies are looking at diversification. And we touched on this a couple of times that, I think we're all looking for how can we, share the insights and move together, brands and retailers and the Vestex community, move forward for how we make that happen. But if we look at the analysis for the CAFTA countries. I mean, Guatemala has always had a more diversified manufacturing base, right? And more types of products, which helps as an incentive to get the brands and retailers to look at and think about, opportunities other than the traditional, t-shirts and knit products that, that trend goes back to the 90s. So I'll stop there, but I'm very positive, and I think that we have a great opportunity to work together on this. And of course, fingers crossed that the trade discussions go well.
Yeah, and I definitely share the same sentiment. Like Julie mentioned, I still see very positive long-term outlook of sourcing from Guatemala in particular. And at the same time, and I do recall, what I observed while visiting Guatemala last year. It's a really great journal, and I enjoy, visiting several, factories there, and I learned a lot. And one important takeaway is I see the emergence of a regional supply chain, the regional textile, production capability. So maybe, it's hard for a specific country to make all different kinds of textile raw materials, but, each country can focus on something, then exchange. And having this kind of regional manufacturing capability not only can support each other, but also, it can definitely comply with the yarn forward rule. And once again, if you can, better solve the textile raw material bottleneck, and it can support you to make more different kinds of products and attract even more investment. It's a I see it's like a beneficial cycle. More U.S. apparel imports from CAFTA-DR, more interest in attracting new investment, and new investment will increase additional manufacturing capability and leads to even more export. So we need to build on this kind of beneficial cycle, and also leverage some unique strength of the region, being very close to the US, being able to offer short speed to market, flexibility, agility, and also sustainability. Yeah, so once again, I shared the same optimistic outlook, and truly I hope we can have a more foreseeable policy environment to make these things happen. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I think that's something that we as Vestex are working with, like to make the conditions to attract more investment and make the companies that are already trust in Guatemala keep on investing and growing in our country. So that's something very important. And thank you so much for both closing with this positive note. I think that on uncertainty times, what we have is to start speaking a little bit more between each other to see where we can find those opportunities and how we can battle the challenges that we are facing, because uncertainty will be part of what we live every day. So as we close, I will love to thank you both, Dr. Sheng Lu and Julia, for their insightful presentation, and also all the comments that you mentioned. I think that we all will leave this session with new ideas and having like some other topics in the top of our mind, like sustainability, circularity, and so much going on right now. So also thank you all for joining us today. This study gives us strategic information to better understand the challenges and opportunity our industry faces, especially in a moment of global trade transformation. So thank you once again for your participation, and we look forward to seeing you at future events organized by Vestex. So thank you all, and feliz día a todos.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.